All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Magatelli from the Student Doctor Network, and I am joined once again by Dr. Neil Chuck, the Director of Advisor Services for the Health Professional Student Association, to answer your questions about primary application submissions. And CAS opens on Tuesday. Any questions you guys have, please put them in the chat. We will do our best to get to them. And, don't freak out. That's what I'm telling myself. Dr. Chuck, how are you doing tonight?
Pretty good. Hello, everybody. I know it's Memorial Day weekend, and I'm sure there's probably better things for many of you guys to be doing other than, being online, freaking out about your primary application. But if you're freaking out about it, well, at least this is a good place to be.
Absolutely. So, with that, the first question, I am disputing a course grade. Should I wait until the registrar changes my grade before submitting?
So obviously, for everybody who's out there, if you do have a course grade change that you're waiting on, I would certainly wait until the registrar changes your grade. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You don't want to be for AMCAS in particular. There's no real way for you to update your transcripts or your course entry. So you really want to make sure for AMCAS for sure. Make sure everything is all ready to go. You already have an idea of what your anticipated GPA is going to be. Don't throw caution into the wind and say you submit one way, then the registrar all of a sudden changes your grade and you have to go back for a correction. You just don't want to take the chance one way or another to slow down your verification. So, for those of you who are thinking about submitting on the first day, there's a lot of things that can really derail you. One of them is making mistakes on the course entry. And so this is one of those examples where this question does just say, make sure that you are as accurate as you can with transcribing what your grades are on transcript entry or course entry, and just make sure there's no questions that you have left on the table that could possibly derail you. For everybody else on the AdSAS or the Liaison platform, you will know that there are opportunities for you to do academic updates. So, okay, if you wanted to, you could probably submit now and then roll the dice and make sure you do your update for your academic update window. That's kind of an up to you sort of thing. So I would still very much say if you know that your grades are pending and the registrar won't send out your transcript until they make the change, wait until then. So just common sense, I hope.
All right. And any questions you guys have, please drop them in the chat. Next question. Should I wait until I'm done with my summer classes to submit my application?
So this also goes back to the difference between AMCAS and the Liaison platforms for AdSAS and ACOMAS and so forth. So for those of you who are on AMCAS, again, there's no academic update for you. So it really depends on what your summer classes are and the importance of having those summer classes. If they're prerequisites or whatever, you've got to kind of make the call on your own in terms of submitting or waiting until those summer grades are put in or are sent into the registrar before submitting. Now, I know many of you are worried about timing. And so if you happen to be one of those, quote, early summer term students, so this weekend also may mark like the first week that you actually have summer classes. Because for many people who have summer term classes, there's two summer terms. It's the 4 weeks before July 4th and then the 4 weeks after July 4th. So if you are in the first summer term, it's up to you to kind of figure out based on where your transcripts, in terms of where your grades are, where everything else is sort of, your letters, your standardized exams, in terms of when you want to submit and if you want to submit it in July. It's not late and not the end of the world if you wind up submitting it in July or a couple weeks after July. So I want to make sure that if you had to wait until the end of the summer one term to submit your application, it's okay to do that wherever in whatever platform that you're using. Now, if you're in summer two because you've taken second semester of chemistry, organic, physics, or whatever, you may want to think about that in terms of just going ahead, saying this is in progress course and just let the process run. I know for a lot of people, it's really important to just get your application in as reasonably early as possible. And what I mean by reasonably early is certainly by around early to mid-July. I want to just make sure that we have, and many people have been tracking the process of, how AMCAS, at least AMCAS verifies applications. they've been good enough that they will post on their website, where they are in the process with the dates of the types of transcripts that they're processing, or when people submit and so forth. We have cycle track that we've developed over the years, which gives you a general sort of curve of how busy the verification process really is. And it kind of gives you a pretty good idea that normally, like within the first, few weeks, like about 5-6 weeks in, is when it ultimately ramps up and it hits its peak. Then there's a pretty slow decay afterwards, and again, it just gives you an idea of how long it takes to really get things verified. So certainly the earlier you are, the fewer applications you got to really worry about in front of you in the queue. But once it hits a plateau, somewhere around mid to late June, it doesn't really change too much afterwards. So it's something that you have to kind of balance one way or another, but you want to have as complete an application as you possibly can. So I hope that gives you some ideas. If you have grades that you're going to wait for until like early July, you can think about waiting, but especially for all the other platforms, you get your chances to do academic updates that AMCAS just doesn't give you. So yeah, I know this may not have helped you, but I hope it helps you somewhat. If it's summer 1, you can probably wait till the end. Summer 2, you probably can submit a little bit earlier.
All right, excellent. And guys, I might respond in the chat. Vonnie, your question about working activity writing styles, we did a webinar on that, and I put the link in there. Bobby Joe, your question about when to submit, we will get to that. Next question from a viewer, Kianyo Q. I apologize if I didn't get that right at all. Some schools recommend 1 year of English writing class. I had 1 semester, but also did 4 courses. Heavy tier 2 writing under psych and neurology. Can I list one of them under English? No, you cannot. And also recommended is not required.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, yeah, you want to make sure when you're doing your course entry, you pretty much have to copy almost, verbatim, or whatever the right word is. You have to generally copy what you see on your transcript. So if you have an unofficial copy, which most of you will have your own unofficial copy, or you can request an official copy sent to you, just go ahead and just, whatever you see, use those prefixes and don't deviate. So if it is a writing intensive course and it's under psychiatry, neuroscience, history, whatever it is, it's got to go under the prefix in which that course is really being offered. Don't deviate from that, because what the verifiers are going to do is they're going to look at your transcript and look at your course entry, and they're going to just make sure that everything completely syncs up and is perfectly transcribed. And I really mean as close to perfectly as you possibly can. So please do not deviate from what you see on the transcripts.
Excellent advice. Should I wait to start a new summer activity before submitting my application?
Well, okay, so this is always a little bit of a contentious point. You can always talk about your future or in progress courses and future or in progress activities. Now, what most of us will probably tell you too is we don't really pay much attention or give much weight to anything you're doing in the future, whether they are courses or their activities. So should you start a new summer activity before submitting an application? First of all, it certainly depends on the activity. And if you are absolutely devoid of any similar activity, like you just started shadowing and you've never had any shadowing before, you may want to wait until you at least get a few hours in before you begin that process. Same thing for non-clinical volunteering. Same thing goes for all the things for which there is a real deficit and you just completely forgot. I would wait a little bit. And for those of you who are starting new jobs or new volunteering opportunities, and you, again, have had no prior experience or nothing in your category that you have experience about, my rule of thumb is, I don't usually pay attention to anything under 50 hours unless it's shadowing. And so usually after 50 hours, you're in a job long enough that you know whether you want to quit or not. And, for a lot of menial jobs, you probably do want to quit after 50 hours, even though you probably don't want to. So, I would basically say, you probably should wait as much as you can. Again, if once you get like about 50 hours of an activity, that might be a good time to say, okay, I'll just put it down, because you just don't want to say, oh, I just started and it's in like 8 hours. There's an argument with that in terms of really how serious we would look at your application, at least that activity. So, do whatever you can to position yourself well. I would certainly say, from my own standpoint, I would wait 50 hours in a new activity before putting it down.
All right, sounds good. How precise should I be with my work activities inventory and with my hours and contact information?
So this is probably one of the things that we see every single year at around this week on the Student Doctor Network forums, about people freaking out about them not being precise. In other words, oh my goodness, I put down 200 hours when it really should have been 50, or reverse that, or something like that. So somehow or another, people are not really paying attention to their copy paste and just letting really weird errors or grammatical mistakes or whatever else just sort of permeate through their application. We always, and many of us on the forums, always try to post and tell people all the time, please do not compel yourself to submit on day one at hour number 1 or second number 1. We actually had Moko, who's one of our very frequent posters, did the annual post to the pre-med forum about do not rush to submit your application. So if you haven't gotten to the forums, I would certainly recommend you look it up. It's also in our Expert Advice Live thread for this session, and we probably have shared it. We'll be sharing it on the chat box, or at least in the chat room too. Please make sure you read through it. And one of the things that really makes it really bad is, make sure you're not totally off on your count. Now, how precise should you be? If you really worked for 50 hours, but you put down you had 40 or 45, that's not going to be something where an accountant is going to come by and sort of audit you in terms of how many activities or how many hours that you've done. We're working on good faith here regarding, the hours that you say that you have. We're working on relatively good faith that the contact information you have, that someone who at least can pick up a proverbial phone and say, yes, you worked there. That's all we really are looking for, if there is ever that type of follow-up. So do the best that you can in as good a faith as you can also. And so, in my mind, it's like, please just make sure you're not off by a factor of 0. Like you say you did something for 2,000 hours when you really mean 200. It kind of comes out in the wash depending on how you describe the rest of your activities. So, I mean, if you only have been in an activity for about 3 months or 4 months and you say you did 2,000 hours, I'm going to really question you on that. But it's not going to raise like an investigation. We're not going to send the FBI or AMCAS is not going to send somebody to go after you because of that. So be as accurate as you can be, work in really good faith, and we'll kind of go from there.
All right, perfect. CR, you asked a question about committee letters. I just linked you an article that will be able to help answer those questions. Next, how important is having the right classification for each of my work or activities?
So also at around this time, the forum gets a ton of questions about how to classify your activities. We have a pinned thread in our forum that really goes over the work and activities discussion. So I really encourage you. Yeah, it might take you a while because it's a pinned discussion. And so it really, we get a whole ton of people asking their questions and we just pin them up in this thread. So you may have to just do a little bit of searching. So just make sure that, again, we're asking you to work in good faith. And so how important it is to have the right classification, there's some things that are very important about it. If it's clinical volunteering or non-clinical, do your best to at least match it as closely as you can to what you actually did. Now, really how important it is in terms of the output that the admissions committees or the admissions team usually gets, is we'll see how you itemize or you put your header on each of your activities, and we'll do some sort of a mass calculation under each category. So we'll get a sense of how many hours you aggregated in terms of employment, or in terms of clinical experience, or in terms of non-clinical experience, or tutoring, or whatever those categories are. There's a readout that is available to those people on the admissions side that pretty much lays out how many hours you said in each of those categories and phrases. And that's where it's important, because we're not going to really cite you really hard in terms of the actual numbers themselves, but we're going to look at it and get a snapshot picture and see, how much you've gotten some clinical exposure and does it really match what your descriptions are. But it's a nice little quick and dirty way to have us just sort of look and see how many activities or what your time distribution is in terms of what you decide is really important for us to know. So you could be off a little bit. That's certainly fine. And again, sometimes the admissions team, we may have our own internal classification and might classify it a different way than what you say. That's our job. Don't worry about it, because you're not going to know. But in any sense, if you are doing a classification, make the right effort. Again, work in good faith. Make sure it's accurate and that you don't slip and it falls into a different category without your knowledge. Really be careful and make sure it's as accurate as you would like for it to be.
Yeah, don't wrap your head too hard around that, Axel. Like, I technically have zero leadership on my AMCAS application, but I managed people for years, and I was in the military and had troops. Like, doesn't mean I don't have leadership. It just means it's not under that banner. Yeah, just don't misrepresent things. All right. Next question. Do I need to submit an other impactful experiences essay?
We have gotten so many questions on the forum about, do you need to submit this essay? And a lot of people are giving examples of what they want to say under that essay box. So we've covered this a little bit before in our personal statements webinar, when we did this a little bit before a couple of weeks ago. And I would certainly say, it's not a required essay, but we know how pre-meds react to things that are optional. And sometimes even though it's optional, people will still consider it required. So what's important is, do you have a remarkable answer that fits the expectations of the other impactful experiences essay? If you do, then sure, put something in there that's appropriate. If you don't, or you have or you're not sure, you can leave it blank. That's certainly fine. The topics that we would like to see covered in other impactful experiences often will show up in other parts of your application. So again, I'm disregarding TMD SAS. They have their version of other impactful experiences. Most of the other health professions application services, except for CASPA for physician assistant, they don't have another other impactful experiences essay in their central application. But that doesn't mean that a school will ask. And a lot of times they'll ask it in the form of something much more vague, like, could you tell us something more about you that you probably didn't talk about in the rest of your application? So you may not need to submit that under that specific prompt, but you might wind up being asked a question similar to it in other aspects of the application. Regardless of it, people do interpret and know that the other impactful experiences essay substituted for what was previously the disadvantaged essay, and people still get confused and think that other impactful experiences is the same thing as a disadvantaged essay. Again, look at our webinar from a couple of weeks ago about the personal statements, and you should get at least a pretty good idea of what my opinion is of other impactful experiences. So, do you need to submit it? Only if you feel compelled to.
Sounds good to me. All right, CR, we're doubling back on your question. Also have a link in the chat to an article about that. How do you feel about committee letters? My school makes the process really complicated, but I don't want any unnecessary shade. I assume shade means like scrutiny.
Well, I'm not sure exactly, either what you mean by unnecessary shade. It's a process. You've got to, if you're going through it, you have to just sort of run through the process, and you just have to, work with it one way or another. Committee letters are a way that an institution provides an opportunity to really support their students throughout their application. At least that's what it's supposed to do in theory. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if I personally feel anything bad about committee letters, because I will admit I've written my fair share of committee letters. So, I know what my benefits were when I was able to advocate for specific applicants and can give a little bit more information about one's background or one's journey to medicine or dentistry or whatever else. And sort of itemize some highlights of your application that you may or may not be, I guess, more upfront about because you're limited by the amount of space that you're given. So what's one of the nice things about committee letters, or even letters of recommendation in general, and I think we've hopefully covered it once before, you may have a certain limited number of characters to talk about an experience. Your references have an unlimited number, so they can go a little bit more deeply into your involvement with their lab or their company or their volunteer organization in a way that may not be able to go into the same level of depth. So committee letters is basically, it's a reference letter in general, an evaluation letter that the school decides they want to do. It's just something that most schools have pretty much set up on the undergrad and post-bac side for their applicants. And there's some, there are some benefits about it, but again, it's not necessarily required in order for you to get in. Now, I will say this: if you are quote unquote avoiding your committee letter process, please be aware and check your school list, especially the secondary application, the secondary essay prompts for many of the medical schools. There are a handful that will say and ask you if you avoided your committee letter process, why. And in some cases, you graduated enough years out that they can't support you for your committee letter. That's perfectly fine. For others of you, it's like, I found out about this committee letter process too late, or I didn't qualify for the committee letter, whatever. Be as honest as you can for those questions. So for the purposes of this presentation, how do I feel about them? It's like, it's something that you got to go through, and just, you got to trust them that they know what they're doing. I'm not sure what unnecessary shade is talking about, so I hope that's not. Hopefully, CR, if you do want to clarify that, please use the chat box for that.
Yeah, guys, please don't use young people slang because we're not going to get it. All right, Ivan, good evening. Thank you for all your helpful advice. Cool. I wanted to ask for letters of recommendation. When should I set a due date for professors if I cannot submit it with primary?
Let me see. Did we I'm trying to see when if we discussed letters of recommendation. I guess we didn't discuss letters of recommendation previously, and it's probably just as well. I think for a lot of people, when they ask people for letters of recommendation, they actually started like January or February or March. They started really early in the process because they kind of knew and could see well ahead in advance that this week is coming. And it's a bad time to ask for letters close to when your finals are underway, or when you have final grades that are due. It's not really a great time because many professors are not, they will be inundated, especially your very popular introductory course professors, whoever they all are. I know from my past experiences, I would get requests and would fulfill requests for like 20 letters of recommendation for people going to med school, dental school, vet school, grad school, whatever else. So at least 20. That takes time, and we understand what your timeline actually is, but don't try to rush the professor or push the professor to adhere to your timeline. It's their timeline. So to that extent, when would have been a good time to set to ask your letters for your, for this process? I would certainly say, and it kind of comes through with a lot of their survey data, they start as early as like the end of fall semester, and they sort of keep going all the way up until March and April. When should you set a due date for professors? I think part of that is, of course, relationship management. You do want to check in and make sure your professors don't forget about you, because there's a lot on their plates that they could be distracted about. Some of it has nothing, and again, understand most of the time it has nothing to do with you. It's nothing ever personal. Like they want to go on vacation, or something weird is happening with grant funding or something like that. You just kind of never know. So, I would make sure I check in with my professors, and if you do have a due date, hopefully you've set it early. Hopefully you've had conversations with your references so that they have a good idea of who you are. Maybe you've given them a draft of your application, maybe a resume, something like that, so they kind of know what to say about you. And above all, it's really important that you really ask all of your references for their ability or their comfort level to provide a strong letter of recommendation. That is code in the academic world, and it really means as much as one possibly can. A strong letter of recommendation really means something that's more akin to the lines of an unqualified recommendation. Unqualified, or we're not going to put any sort of caveats or any conditions on how our recommendation is. You're as bright as you possibly can be, which, okay, that can be taken a number of ways. But on the other hand, I think you could ask, as long as they say they can write you a very strong letter about your abilities, in the lab, in the classroom setting, and how they may parlay to how well you do in medical school. That's all I think you can ask, one way or another. So be flexible with professors. That's the only thing I really will ask you to do. There's other advice that I know I can give, but I know we've got a lot of time on. We still have a lot of time to go through and a lot of questions. So I hope that helps.
All right, and we got a topical follow-up. How frequently should I follow up with a professor who has gone beyond the deadline I set and is being unresponsive to follow-ups? Part of that is going to be how far past the deadline, how many times have you tried to follow up? Have you tried giving them a call, or are you using email exclusively? Is this an individual that you can go visit with in person and it won't be poorly received? There's a lot to that one.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about relationship management, and just understand, professors can only do whatever they can, but on the other hand, it's also your responsibility to make sure that you have contingency plans. So if for a lot of people, when they ask for letters of recommendation, yeah, you might wind up with like 8 letters or 7 or 8 letters. That's, I mean, great. It's better to have more than you need than fewer than you need. So just keep that in mind. You should try and do as much as you can to do follow-up. And hopefully your first conversation with your professor, hopefully you've had more than one conversation with your professor. But at least, you should be able to have set the timeline in terms of like, when would be a good time for me to follow up with you? When are you on vacation? What are the sorts of things that you want to make sure, if they can give you feedback, that they can give you timely feedback? It is really tough. I wish I could tell you what you should do after a particular point. Again, you just don't know what's going on with the professor's life. And it could be something that has nothing to do with you. So please be mindful and be professional in whatever you do. If you have to, and you don't get a lot of responses, you always have to go to a plan B. Make sure you do it, but it's better to have had those plan Bs earlier than later.
Absolutely. Is there anything I need to do for early decision?
So I think this is something rather unique to AMCAS, in which that you still have early decision processes for AMCAS. I'm not so sure for ACOMAS. I'm fairly sure for most of the other health professions programs, early decision doesn't really exist like it does in undergrad. So we tell people a lot that if you are thinking about pushing the button and saying you're applying early decision to one and only one school for the AMCAS application, you should already know ahead of time that this means you fully lock in and commit to one and only one school that you're applying to. And you will not be able to apply to any other school until you hopefully hear back about an early decision action on your application, until I think it's August, which I think most of us kind of know that if you submit in August, you really are starting to get really late in the process. So this is one of those times where this is not undergrad. Early decision does not function the same way. I tell people all the time, if you need to know whether your school does early decision the way you think it does. There are a lot of ways that I have used early decision, and it was not to try to snag an applicant super, super early because they wanted to go to my school, which is what most people think it's useful for. A lot of schools will use early decision to really take care of their articulation agreement applicants. So people who qualified from their undergrad 3 years to medical school 3 years or 4 years program, 3 to 4 program, or something like that. Or maybe this is some way that the post-bac applicants from a specific program get an articulation acceptance, and so they have to apply early decision. So you just kind of never know how every single school uses that early decision process. And sometimes we will advertise for early decision and we actually don't do it. You want to know early because you don't want to be wasting your money and just throwing in an application, locking yourself out from all the other schools and wind up having to scramble like mad. So I would certainly say for most people, regular decision, that's what you should do. Early decision only if you are told by someone in admissions, yeah, we really want you to, and we really think you would benefit from early decision or something, some signal like that. Still doesn't guarantee that you would get it unless it is part of a guaranteed track or a guaranteed agreement. So I certainly say just make sure everything is, if you are applying early decision, make sure everything is in play. This includes all your letters, this includes all your transcripts, no mistakes, nothing else that can really set you back. If you have to take Casper preview, make sure those are done before too long, like even before July. Just get everything in order before you can. So you need to make sure everything is ready to go by the time you submit your application very, very early.
Yeah, the odds aren't in favor of getting in the first place. So if you want to take a whole bunch of other schools off the table, that's I'm not much of a statistics guy, but you might want to avoid it. All right, next question. I haven't gotten word back about my financial assistance program application. Should I submit? Email the AAMC. They are very responsive.
Yeah, please email them. And sometimes it might take them a while to go through the process. But I will tell you this, if you are waiting for a decision, but you submit early, you are paying for all of those applications that you're designating instead of getting 20 free. And so it's your money. If you really are antsy about it, I would wait unless I knew I was approved for the fee assistance program up front. And this kind of goes for everybody else too. I mean, any FAP program, if you are waiting for a decision and you haven't gotten confirmation yet, I would wait until I knew for sure whether you got you qualified for the FAP or you didn't, because that makes a ton of money. That takes that's a lot of money that you're going to save one way or another, and we're all into saving money.
Yeah, not only are you going to get the 20 schools for free, you also have a lot of programs will waive your secondary fees, and those could add up very quickly because some schools will auto send secondaries because they cost money. So
yeah, and we want you exactly. So if you get your AP letter early, yeah, we'll find ways to get that avoidance.
Yeah, email the AAMC, call them. They are really super responsive about this stuff. Get in touch with them. They will help you out.
Yeah, and same thing with all the other programs too. All the other application services should be able to help you.
Absolutely. All right. Here's the question I needed to know. What's the latest date I can submit to AMCAS and still make the first batch?
Oh dear. So everyone seems to be so fixated on this idea of the first batch. So let me take a little bit of a step back. So what AMCAS does starting on Tuesday is it is the open date for you to send the money. And that's important because I hopefully for the last 3 weeks or so, for those of you on AMCAS, you've been kind of playing around, filling in certain boxes in the AMCAS application, just getting yourself ready to make sure that once 12:01 on Tuesday hits Eastern time, you can punch go and everything works. Again, it's okay to wait a while. So the biggest question was, to make the first batch, what exactly is the first batch? The first batch in what people are thinking about is the first batch is the first bundle of data that is sent from the AMCAS office with verified transcripts and GPAs that is available to all the schools to pick up. Now, the concept of first batch came way, and I will put it in parlance as the dark ages, where we literally had you type in your AMCAS application and send it to Washington, D.C. or wherever the office is that collects AMCAS applications. And with all, they will have their central warehouse and they will pick off all of the paper transcripts that your university sends. And they will literally go through and check and verify all of your transcripts. And that's usually done in some semblance of chronological order. I say some semblance because it's not like, you may have like maybe 100 to 1,000 people collecting all these transcripts. And so it really depends on how fast each individual person checks your transcripts, and depends on how many transcripts you have in order to be verified, all that other mess. So anyway, the first batch basically was the first completed group of applications with verified GPAs and verified transcript entry and everything that they would literally ship off copies of to every single admissions office. That was termed the first batch. We are in an electronic age now. I don't think the concept of first batch is exactly the same. I think for the most part, the first batch still refers to the first time that we have available calculated GPAs and other anything that we've had to do to verify your GPA with your transcript entry. It's the first day that AMCAS will flip the switch and allow the calculated GPAs to be distributed to anybody in the AMCAS world who needs that information because they received an application from somebody. So the first batch is a little bit, it's a very antiquated term, but that's really what it means. So the latest date you can submit your AMCAS and still make the first batch. Again, go to cycle track. You can kind of see where the curve really starts going up and up until you hit your peak of like roughly 4 to 6 weeks after you submit your application. And that's kind of where you hit saturation for everyone or all the resources that are involved with verifying applications. But for all intents and purposes, anytime during the first, all the way till like mid June, even possibly all the way up until the first transmission date, it really will depend on how many transcripts. If you have like one, you could probably do pretty well at like mid-June if you needed to be in the quote first batch. But for all intents and purposes, the concept of first batch is just so different now. I mean, it's just a question of like, okay, everybody that we verified all the way up until like, literally like what I guess if it's June 21st or something like that, anybody who's done by that point gets submitted and, we get it into the data stream. So I if needed be, because everything is just a little bit more instantaneous, you could probably say mid-June. I don't know. I would probably say that would be the latest date. But then again, that assumes you don't have 8 transcripts that have to be verified. So, that's the one thing I would just basically tell you is like, don't panic. Please, you can wait until like early to mid-June. You're going to be just fine.
All right, sounds good to me. Next question, and guys, if you have questions, please drop them in the comments. Should I wait until I have all my letters submitted before I submit my application?
Okay, so letters are independent of the verification process. And yeah, it would be absolutely awesome if you had all your letters, all of them are submitted, but that is a independent process from the verification process. So having your letters all be entered has nothing to do with the first batch problem, which I think people get very confused about it, but they really are independent streams of data. Now, I would certainly say whatever the status is of your letters, you don't let that persuade you to hold and delay submitting your AMCAS. Because again, it's totally independent of each other. Just submit your AMCAS when you are absolutely sure it's accurate and ready to go, and then follow up with your letters as need be. I mean, for many people, again, because they asked their references to submit letters relatively early, there is an early date when probably letters are received by AMCAS. For the most part, they will obviously those if you provide the appropriate information to match your letter with the reference or whatever, because you know what I'm talking about with the reference ID and the letter ID and all that stuff. As long as all that's accurate, it's pretty easy and really quick to identify that you've had a letter submitted. And again, everything's electronic, so we're not adding extra time for photocopying like we used to way back decades ago. So you don't need to wait till having all your letters. And this is important for those of you who are freaking out about your committee letters, because I know for sure there's many people who, their committees don't finish until like August or September. Don't worry about that. You should not wait until August or September to submit your application because your committee letter won't be ready until then. Of course, you shouldn't do that. So let that happen independently. Just let it go and we'll kind of roll from there. Most schools are used to the fact that there are committee letter processes, and historically those committee letters, everyone knows when those become ready from certain schools. It never penalizes students from those schools that have to wait until August, September to get committee letters sent out. There really is no penalty assessed to anybody who has to wait for committee letters. So just submit it. That's okay.
All right. Another question here. Just want to confirm that I only need one school to get the AMCAS verified. Yes. And I can add schools after submission. Also, yes. And can I assign LORs after submission too? I don't know the answer to that last one.
Yes, you should be able to as well, as long as you didn't fill all 10 spots of your letters or on your AMCAS letters box. So again, just making sure. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that everyone, and I know we didn't remark about it specifically, is the fact that yes, all you need is one school to be designated in order for you to get the ball rolling for AMCAS verification. This is important for many of you in what is called the throwaway schools strategy, which is you're applying without your MCAT, for example, and you really want to make sure you don't spend your tons of money until you really know what your score is, because in your mind, having a very, very good score will dictate what group of schools you're going to apply to. So it may make a difference to you between a 512 and a 518. That's sort of an example of that. So what people will do is if they have any doubts whatsoever, they will submit and designate one school that they feel they would never, ever really want to go to. And so I'm not going to name any particular names, but certainly, you might throw it away to a very, very high volume school, for example. I mean, I'm just hypothetically saying a school that takes like 30,000 applicants for a small class size of 100, which there's no school that does that. But that's one example that people would love to use. So it's like, there's no darn way they're going to pick me. I mean, maybe they will, but nevertheless, the important part is get your transcripts verified. That's the longest step in the AMCAS verification or any of these verification processes, is making sure all your transcripts are together, they are scanned in or at least checked in electronically, and everything totally checks out with your transcript entry. And that's the only thing you need to worry about. You can always add more schools. That's perfectly fine. It's just a little bit more money. You cannot take away schools, obviously, for a good reason. And you can always do that. If you wind up bombing your MCAT, then you're stuck with the dilemma of, do I completely withdraw my AMCAS? Well, it's certainly easier to have only lost the cost of sending it to one school and withdrawing your AMCAS application than submitting it to 30 schools and realizing you just threw away a whole lot of money if you're going to withdraw your application. So that's one of the reasons why people think about the throwaway strategy and when it is useful. So you can definitely do that. And if you have any doubts, definitely contact AMCAS. The AMCAS help team has the help documentation available. And of course, their helpline is certainly available too. So yeah, don't hesitate to use that help documentation for AMCAS or the appropriate CAS that you're applying to.
Yeah, on our side of the house, we know some people over at the AAMC, and they would like it if you guys contacted them. Like, that's what they are there for. Please use those phone numbers. That's what they're there for.
Please use the phone numbers before you make mistakes. The conversations are a lot nicer.
Yes. This is not a time to act first and ask for apology later. Or apologize, whatever, you guys know what I mean. All right, so question, when it is too late to submit your application? Well, good news is I can't use grammar anymore, so we can tell that I'm pretty quick with this process.
So when is it too late to submit your application? Well, obviously, one of the things I'd want you to do is I want you to pay attention to any deadlines each individual school has placed on you and what they feel it's too late for you to submit your primary application as well as your secondary. Now, this is very common. I'm in my background's in the dental school world, and many of those schools, ADSAS opens, very early in May, and, submission happens a lot too. But then you get very surprised, even though ADSAS may continue to be open until like February or until February the following year. Some schools will say, we will not take your ADSAS application if you submit it after September 1st. That's super early. So for those of you who are submitting outside the AMCAS application, please pay attention to the school's own deadlines. Now, even if you waited until then to submit your application, that's still going to be super late. Since, as you see for the cycle tracker, you get like a few thousand applications that will come in within 3 days of the open, or whatever like that. So, the road to roughly 50,000 applications for AMCAS is a long one, but you get to about 1,000 pretty quickly. But that's 1,000 out of 55. So it is what that is. So when is it too late to submit your application? In terms of general convention and rules of thumb from the experts on Student Doctor Network, we generally like the date of July 4th. July 1st if you're Canadian, but you know why. So around July 4th, make sure you check in and make sure everything is ready and has been submitted, and just make sure that you're good for that. If you're a part of ACOMAS, the timeline is pushed a little bit later, like to October, November, around mid-Thanksgiving or something like that, Veterans Day to Thanksgiving. That's usually considered to be, quote, too late to submit your application. Don't, but basically the important part is it's better to have a relatively later application as long as it's accurate and as mistake free as possible. It's not good to submit an early mistake filled application. So you've got to balance it one way or another about how ready you really are. But in terms of how late is too late, pay attention to the school deadlines.
Okay. 1 second. Guys, any questions you have, please keep them coming. Here's one I just thought of. Let's hope that I used the English language a little better than that last question. Do I need to have a preview score before submitting my application, or is it okay to have my test date after I have submitted?
Okay. So not only for preview, but also for the MCAT, for those of you who were talking about the AMCAS application or TMD SAS or, ACOMAS even, there's when you're filling out your primary application, there is an indicator box that says, hey, I have a pending future score that's going to be coming. Please check that box. If that's the case, that should not stop you at all from submitting your application. I also will tell you that it has no effect on your transcript verification. That's just a separate data stream to get your MCAT score and integrate it with your AMCAS data, or your preview score, get that integrated into your AMCAS data too. Casper has no way to communicate with AMCAS or any of the other services. They go through a different server on their own to communicate with any of the programs that use Casper. So don't worry about them. So basically, you can submit before you have an actual score. You do not need to wait until your preview time window to submit your application. And in fact, there's no reason for you to do that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm taking it like June 24th. I get a score like July 10th or something. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people get freaked out about it because it's still not clear among the schools that require preview if they need it for considering you for an interview or anything like that. I mean, it's still, we're waiting for a little bit more clarification. Now, I think the general consensus from what we're reading off of websites and from some admissions personnel is that, they would like for you to, take your preview exam as early as possible, just like you would for your MCAT. So take it for what you will. So treat it as if it's like another part of the process, but you still want to keep the same windows as your MCAT. So, I hate to freak people out to say, if you're taking your preview in August or September, you have no shot. It's too late. No, I'm not at that point yet. I think many schools who require it, that it's their problem in terms of their process. But I don't know how many people really, really super say, we're going to use your score as part of whether you get an interview or not. There's just so many people using preview and Casper in so many different ways. There's not a consensus about it. So don't freak out. Just take it whenever you're able to, as early as you have. It's convenient, and just kind of we'll let it go from there.
Yeah, and the AAMC knows that this is a newer test. Awareness of it is growing amongst the student population. Check the school's websites. They'll specify how they're utilizing Preview or Casper. I don't have the web address on hand, but all of the preparation materials for preview are available for free on the AAMC site. They want you to go there and use their free resources. Again, go to their site, grab the free resources. You know, if you got to take it, just don't bomb it.
Yeah. And we did an earlier expert advice live stream on this back in April. Like this was the first one that we did was really focused on situational judgment tests. So if you missed it, we have the recording. You know, go to YouTube and look for our early recording on it and just kind of go through it.
All right, and the link to the preview prep materials are in the chat for YouTube. Cool. Any other questions, guys? We got a couple of minutes here. So any last minute things?
Well, there's a lot of, from my end, I know there's a lot of other things. And certainly I want to highlight the resources that the forums gives you and a lot of stuff that over the years SDN has really built up. So, you know, make sure that, you know, if you don't know about CycleTrack, just check it out. You could probably put it as a tab or a bookmark and just sort of check it every other day obsessively, please, you know, do it within reason. We definitely have a lot of the forum threads that, again, as I mentioned, are pinned. So if you have questions about letters, recommendation, work, and activities, about the AMCAS or ADSAS or whatever other application, they are now ready and they are pinned up on the various respective forums. I also think all of the current 25, 26 school threads are now operational. I think most of them are. I'm not sure about every single one of them if we're talking the vet school or anybody else, but as far as I can tell on the med and the dental side of things, the 25, 26 school threads are now open. So if you haven't gone into them, I would certainly suggest if you are applying to a specific school, it's on your school list, take the time, and if you want to follow the school specific thread as one of your favorites or one that you're going to quote subscribe to, so you can get at least some notices whenever someone posts into that forum. This is important because for many schools, they don't release their secondary essay prompts until a little bit later once their actual window opens. And given our current, political climate, there is expected to be perhaps some changes to many of the so-called diversity essays that are out there. I don't know if it will affect the prompts themselves, but it might affect some of the context in terms of understanding what the prompt is looking for. We won't know until we start seeing secondary essay prompts. Most prompts from most schools are not changing unless they may do some little tweaks. But this is one of those years that is going that, we can say the word unprecedented until we're blue in the face. And it is probably a really good idea if you really wanted to just make sure you subscribe and follow each individual school thread so that you're not completely left out of the loop if someone says, hey, did you get this email? Or you will start getting really obsessive with the types of communications that you receive from admissions teams. So, it's good to know everybody else got the same email you did and that you all are panicking the exact same way for something that is absolutely unconsequential. So please, as I said, it sounds silly, but this is what we've all done over the years to just really make sure that everyone is in the loop. Everyone hears about when interview invitations start coming out. Everyone hears when decisions are coming out over the past year. And so use those resources as much as you can. And I know we have a lot more that SDN, thanks to the support of our donors, has helped us develop for all of you. And again, CycleTrack is one of those.
Yeah, we also have the AMCAS verification tracker. And again, guys, don't freak out. It's going to work or it's not going to work. Give it your best effort, but you can't magically change things by keeping yourself up. I've done that the hard way. Please learn from my experience. All right, so one more question on the things that I am wondering side. How late can I submit to TMD SAS to still be in the proverbial first batch, which we now know doesn't exist?
So that's a different ball of wax entirely because TMD SAS does not rely on transcript verification. They actually will ask you to send their transcripts at a later time. So first batch for TMD SAS has a totally different meaning because you're not waiting for anything. They really are literally going to be collecting all of your data. And certainly if there is any weighting, it's for letters of recommendation. But again, that's usually a separate stream from everything else. So, how late can you be? Pay very close attention to whatever their timelines are for each of the individual schools. I would certainly say if you want to be like primary consideration or whatever priority consideration, certainly try to get it done within the first month. And I think we're kind of within the first month right now, partly because one, there's so few schools. And, relatively speaking, you still have a lot of schools that you're applying to. And again, you pay one fee for essentially all the schools in TMD SAS that are relevant to your application. So, dental, vet, podiatry, or whatever. So, I would certainly say, I don't know if there's a too late, but I would certainly say, I think a decent rule of thumb from my own understanding of it is try to get it in within the first month of it open. It just sort of makes a little bit of sense.
Cool. All right, we got a couple of questions that came in. These are probably going to be the last ones, guys. Quick note: CycleTrack is not an SDN resource. The AMCAS tracker is.
AMCAS tracker. Sorry, my bad.
But do not marry yourself to anything in this process, guys. Use whatever will help you. So, question from Julia. You've probably answered this question a million times. No. That would take a lifetime. But how many schools should we apply to? I've seen anywhere from 25 to 40 online. My current list is 40 schools. Anecdotally, I have a friend who's in an MD PhD program. He applied to 70 schools, and he said it was a gigantic mistake. So don't go that high on it. Hop on the forums, Julia. Your school list is going to partly be dependent on what you're looking for in a program. Dr. Chuck knows more. What do we need to do?
Yeah, this is not undergrad. This is not applying for undergrad programs where, again, it's just too easy to click on a button and just apply. It costs you money. If you have enough to apply to 40 or more schools, I mean, good for you. I don't know if that's what I would do with my life. I just tell people, given how the application process runs, I would use my rule of thumb, which is, one school gets 1 day for a secondary. So if you apply to 30 schools, you're going to be working 30 days on secondaries, roughly speaking. So the more days, the more schools that you apply to for AMCAS, the more days you've got to sort of budget for yourself. And I say that even though you may have pre-written essays and maybe have a pretty good idea because we've posted past years prompts on our forums from past cycles, it still doesn't mean that you're going to be confronted with something brand new. It also doesn't mean that you understand how long it takes for you to go through their admissions portal. So if you think the AMCAS admissions portal is one thing, sometimes nowadays every single school has their own admissions portal. So you got to type in the same information into their system, or hope that if they imported your data that everything's right. That's one of the things that you also have to understand is that this is only the beginning of all the various portals that you're going to be working with. So being very organized is really key and important. And really, the more schools you apply to, the larger the complexity that you have to be able to manage. So please understand that. And, you all have to do the same thing with emails and passwords. You want to be smart about that. As best as you can. So in my mind, I would tell people, 25 is fine, 25 to 35, depending on things. If you're in California, obviously, that, you don't have a great benefit of in-state options. Whereas if you came from other schools that have plenty of in-state options, you may have to adjust that a little bit too. I also include in my number the number of DO schools you're going to be applying to. Obviously, many of you are doing TMD SAS, so that you have that already as a number that you then you want to add to that with AMCAS. It's a little bit more of a complicated number, but I basically will tell you, like, one school, 1 day for secondaries. That's probably the right rule. And I would certainly say if your school list is good, 25 to 30 is enough. This is not a contest where success is measured by going 80% on getting interviews. You probably don't want that, actually, quite frankly. If you're going to have 40 schools, if you imagine yourself being on The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, that's hard. You really don't want to go on 30 interviews out of 40. if you can help it. So you want to keep it reasonable for yourself and do your best to focus on the smaller number of schools and know why you are a good fit for each of those schools themselves. We talked a lot about it in all of our previous live streams. So again, please, feel free to catch up on all of those other past recordings.
Yeah, this is so much work. You don't want anything you're doing to end up being like, to use a football reference, like garbage time. You don't want to just have to like get through it and watch that clock expire. It's like, oh, great. There goes God knows how much of my life and money. Next question. For AA Comas, I was told to wait for MCAT to submit the application. Is it correct? Looks like AA Comas needs everything before submit the primary. How long does it take for AA Comas to verify?
So I would check with ACOMAS to just make sure in the help documentation that that's actually the case. I haven't heard that they really require you to have an MCAT score in order to submit an application. It doesn't really make any sense because the liaison platform does allow for people to designate a future date as pending. So, and I don't know whether that is true or not. So check with ACOMAS, see if that's absolutely true. Do not just take it on face value. And I wouldn't necessarily know. Now, for ACOMAS, how long does it take for them to do verifications? Now, unfortunately, we don't have a similar cycle tracker for ACOMAS or TMDSAS or anything else like that. I don't know if they share that information about where they are in the processing. My suspicion is because Liaison is a big, big organization. They handle, I think, in the neighborhood of about 40 to 80 different central application services. So they have like a huge bank of people or scanners or whatever else to verify a lot of applications. So it really depends a lot on their overall traffic, on how long it takes for them to verify. They will likely still say on their website, expect it to be like 4 to 6 weeks, because that's probably when they're at their peak form for that particular subset of applications. But the liaison team has been doing this for a very, very long time, and they're pretty, at least the last couple of years, they've been pretty reliable when it comes to transcript verification. So it probably will take, as I said, expect about 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and and you're probably about right. Now, again, ACOMAS has a little bit of a different profile in that, yes, you can submit early, but again, you aren't really late until you get to November. So I would probably expect if you did submit before November, your transcript verification is probably going to be relatively quick.
All right, cool. So I heard don't worry about AA Comas until like October. You guys should probably take a different message than me, though. All right, last question. And guys, thank you for all the great questions. Apologies if it was already answered, but is a mid to late June, early July MCAT significant in terms of delays?
In terms of delays of processing your AMCAS, no, or ACOMAS or anything. I think when people think about delays when it comes to reviewing your application or anything else, we have to kind of roll with the punches with this. If it's the only item that a school is waiting for you, it kind of depends on where they are in their queue and how early they do interviews or whatever else. So it becomes really highly school specific. So if you take your MCAT in July, and of course your score doesn't come out until about 3 or so weeks later after your test date, how much does it really affect you? On the AMCAT side of things, again, interview season is really, really long. And as long as there's nothing else that could hold up your application, it's pretty seamless. Once the scores are finally released to you, it's released to AMCAS and all the schools. They're easily able to sort of pick it up and integrate it into whatever their evaluation system is for your file. So I don't think in that sense there's a delay. Where the schools are in looking at your applications, that's a completely school by school specific problem. I don't think I don't think in that sense, given that timing, it's that much to worry about. Again, because you've got interviews going on from, as early as August all the way out to like February or March or something, depending on the school. So every school's figured it out. You're not the first person to have an issue or to be challenged by having to take your MCAT in July. And I'm fairly certain there are plenty of people who took their MCAT in July that still wound up with their way of getting into medical school. So I would say do the best that you can. It certainly helps if you have a really good MCAT score, I guess, is the other important part.
Yeah, that one's always seems to be true. All right, guys, thank you so much for all the questions. We really appreciate it. We will be back 2 weeks to discuss core competencies. All right. So, guys, again, thank you.
One more slide. One more slide too. Yes.
Oh no, that I don't know why that populated. All right, I'm just all right, guys. Thank you. We'll see you next time. Have a great evening.